Chapter 17. Complications. I really thought deleting that email meant I'd made it through the worst. I was wrong. It started when I accidentally overheard a conversation I definitely wasn't supposed to hear. I'd been walking back from the break room, minding my business, carrying a questionable cup of coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. As I passed Killian's office, I noticed the door was cracked open, just enough for voices to slip out, and I recognized one of them immediately. Killian's grandfather, the current alpha. I slowed down. Not on purpose. My feet just forgot how to work. "I'm serious, Killian." His grandfather's voice came through, stern and gruff. "It's time you start focusing on the future. The pack needs stability. An heir." Oh, I took a step back. This was definitely one of those keep walking moments. But then Killian responded. Don't worry, I'm handling the pack just fine." "You're handling it now," his grandfather shot back. "But leadership isn't just about now. You need to settle down. You need a mate." I froze. A mate? My brain short-circuited right there in the hallway. Killian didn't respond immediately, which only made it worse. My stomach twisted. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck. And suddenly, the break room coffee in my hand didn't feel so important anymore. I turned and walked out before my brain convinced me to keep eavesdropping like some kind of creep. Back at my desk, I stared at my screen, trying to remember how to function. A mate. An heir. Right. Totally normal stuff for an alpha to deal with, except now all I could think about was that night. The night everything changed. It had been during one of those late-night work sessions. Everyone else had gone home, and the office lights were dimmed except for the glow of our monitors. I hadn't planned on staying late, but Killian was there, and I'd convinced myself I needed to prove something. We'd been going over code. Something dull about encryption. But somewhere between lines of programming and exhausted jokes, things shifted. He leaned too close. I didn't move away. I could still remember the way his hand brushed against mine, slow and careful, like he wasn't sure if I'd pull back. I hadn't. The rest blurred. Heat, hands, the feeling of his lips against my neck. I hadn't stopped him. I hadn't wanted to stop him. And now, here I was, pregnant, at my desk, hoping no one could tell I was reliving the moment that got me into this mess. Elise's voice snapped me out of it. "You okay? You've been staring at that spreadsheet for 10 minutes, and I'm pretty sure you haven't blinked." I blinked. "I'm fine." Elisa raised an eyebrow. "A liar. What happened?" I hesitated. I overheard Killian's grandfather talking to him. Her eyes widened. "Oh boy. What about?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "He's pressuring Killian to, find a mate." Lisa's eyes practically sparkled. "Ooh, drama. What did Killian say?" I sighed. I didn't stick around long enough to hear the rest. Lisa smirked. "Well, maybe you already found a mate, and his grandfather just doesn't know yet." I groaned. "Don't start. Too late. This is premium gossip, Rae. Premium gossip that involves me." "Exactly. That's what makes it fun." "Huh. I thought I was in the clear for the rest of the day, until Killian's grandfather showed up. I was in the middle of typing up project notes when the atmosphere in the office shifted. Conversations quieted, chairs creaked a little less, and even Lisa straightened up. I glanced toward the entrance. There he was, tall, broad, silver hair neatly combed back, and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Alpha energy practically oozed off him, and unfortunately, those sharp eyes landed directly on me. He walked through the office like he owned the place, which, to be fair, he kind of did, and stopped at the edge of my desk. "Miss Westwood?" he said, his tone polite but coarse. I swallowed. Of course. Lisa's eyes bulged. I gave her a quick, don't freak out glance and followed him toward Killian's office. Killian sat behind his desk, clearly not thrilled that his grandfather had dragged me in here. The Alpha wasted no time. "I understand you're working closely with Killian's department," he said, watching me carefully. "Tell me, how long have you been on this project?" I clasped my hands in front of me. "A few months." "And your qualifications?" My heart pounded. Was this an interview or an interrogation? Killian leaned back in his chair, clearly over it. "She's more than qualified, and you know it." His grandfather didn't blink. "I'm simply making sure personal interests aren't interfering with pack business." I felt the blood drain from my face. Killian sat up straighter, his gaze darkening. "That's enough." His grandfather didn't look away from me. "I trust you understand the weight of working in this pack." I nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." The Alpha gave a curt nod, then left the office as quickly as he'd arrived. I let out a slow breath, glancing at Killian. "Well," I muttered, "that wasn't awkward at all." Killian ran a hand down his face. "Ignore him. He likes to test people." "Great. Love that for me." Killian's gaze softened slightly. "You handled it fine." I wasn't sure about that, because now I wasn't just worried about my job. I was worried Killian's grandfather already suspected everything. Chapter 18, Slipping Up. Avoiding Killian wasn't as easy as I thought. I tried everything, taking the long route to the break room, conveniently missing meetings, and practically diving under my desk whenever I saw him coming. It worked for about 3 days. On the 4th day, I ran out of places to hide. I was at my desk, typing furiously like I was solving world hunger through coding, when I felt it, that Alpha presence. I didn't have to look up to know Killian was standing behind me. Rae. Busted. I spun around in my chair, giving him my best "I'm super busy" smile. "Hey, Killian, what's up?" He raised an eyebrow. "You've been avoiding me?" "What, new?" I said, dragging the word out like that somehow made it believable. "I've just been busy. Lots of code to write." Killian crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You skipped the project meeting this morning." I forgot?" "Lisa said you were too emotionally fragile for corporate life and took an early lunch." I groaned. Lisa needs to stop talking. Killian didn't budge. "What's going on, Rae?" "I told you, Rae." I sighed, realizing I wasn't getting out of this. But before I could explain, or lie, probably lie, Brielle chose that exact moment to stroll by. My stomach twisted. Killian's gaze darkened, but Brielle just kept smiling, like she didn't see the storm brewing. I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. I'm sure Brielle's just joking. She wasn't. Brielle gave me a sweet, pitying look. I mean, you can't blame people for talking. It's not exactly normal for Killian to spend so much time with someone like you. Killian's posture shifted, tension rolling off him in waves. Someone like her? His voice was calm, but I could tell by the edge in his tone that he was 2 seconds away from ending Brielle's entire career. I panicked. Okay, well, I think this conversation has gone way off track. She's clearly getting special treatment, Brielle continued, ignoring me. I'm sure it has nothing to do with personal interest. Killian took a step forward. If you have a problem with Rae's involvement in this project, take it up with me. Otherwise, I suggest you keep your opinions to yourself. Brielle's smug expression faltered for half a second. I was just making an observation. Don't. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. But somehow that one word carried enough weight to make Brielle backpedal immediately. She mumbled something about deadlines and practically sprinted down the hall. I exhaled slowly, wishing I could crawl under my desk. Killian turned back to me. Now, what's really going on? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I wasn't ready to tell him. I couldn't tell him. So naturally, my brain decided to betray me. It's nothing. I waved my hand vaguely. You know, dealing with being pregnant and all. Silence. I froze, eyes widening as the words hung between us like a bomb I had just casually lobbed into the room. Killian blinked once. You're... what? Oh. I swallowed hard. Oh no. Killian stared at me, completely still. I meant, pregnant with ideas. You know, like brain babies. Very creative process happening. He didn't blink. Super full of innovation these days, I added weakly. Ha ha. Killian snorted and rolled over. Oh no. Killian squeaked. Killian finally spoke, voice low. Rae. I groaned, dropping my head into my hands. I'm an idiot. Start over, Killian said, his tone unreadable. Right now. I peeked at him through my fingers. I was going to tell you. His eyes softened, but his expression stayed firm. When? Before the baby graduated high school. I tried. Killian didn't laugh. Okay, I sighed, sitting up straighter. I didn't plan to tell you this way. It just happened. Killian exhaled, running a hand down his face. I need to sit down. There's a chair right there. He didn't move. Just kept standing there, staring at me like I had suddenly grown a second head. After a long moment, he finally asked, How long have you known? A few weeks, I admitted. He nodded slowly, processing. And you didn't think I should know? I was considering telling you. Eventually. Killian's eyes flicked to my stomach, then back to me. Are you okay? I blinked. You're not mad? He shook his head. I don't have time to be mad right now. I just need to know if you're okay. I felt something in my chest tighten. Yeah, I think so. His eyes softened even more. Good. I glanced away, feeling heat rise to my face. My body gushed. Don't think this conversation's over, Killian added, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "We'll talk more later." I groaned. "Great. I can't wait." "Thank you." I sat at my desk, pretending to work. Lisa whispered something from the next cubicle, but I barely heard her. My brain was stuck on one thing. I told Killian I was pregnant, and he didn't say much after that. He didn't yell, didn't ask a million questions, just left the office. That was almost worse. I kept waiting for him to text, call, something, but there was nothing. The silence stretched all afternoon, and every time I thought about it, my stomach crept up, and my stomach crept further and further away. It felt like the night. Lisa peeked over the divider. "Okay, you've been typing on a blank document for 10 minutes. What's going on?" I stopped hammering nonsense on my keyboard. "Nothing, just brainstorming," she snorted. "Sure, let me guess. Thinking of names for baby Voss?" I groaned, dropping my head onto my desk. "Lisa, please." "Relax. Killian doesn't seem mad." I peeked at her. "Yeah, but he didn't seem thrilled either." I sobbed more than ever. Then Elmer wrapped his arm around my shoulder. Lisa shrugged. "Maybe he's processing. I mean, it's not every day someone drops the, 'Surprise, you're gonna be a dad bomb.' That's not exactly comforting. Wasn't supposed to be." By the time the afternoon meeting rolled around, I was ready to hide under my desk permanently. Everyone gathered in the conference room, shuffling in with laptops and coffee. Killian wasn't there yet. I sat at the far end of the table, hoping to blend in. Maybe I could stay quiet, contribute nothing, and sneak out when it was over. But as soon as Killian walked in, I felt his presence like a heat wave. He didn't look at me. Not even a glance. That knot in my stomach tightened. Jonah started going over project updates. I kept my eyes on my screen, pretending I wasn't painfully aware of how Killian's gaze skipped right over me every time he scanned the room. This wasn't normal. Even before all of this, Killian was good at keeping his emotions in check. Calm, professional, unreadable. But this was different, cold. I shifted in my chair, the tension in the room pressing down like a weight. Finally, Jonah wrapped things up and asked for final notes. Killian straightened. His tone clipped. "There's one thing." I froze. Killian's eyes swept over the table. "Rae will no longer be handling lead development on the encryption project." My heart dropped. Lisa's head snapped toward me, her mouth slightly open. I stared at him, waiting for an explanation. Something. But he didn't elaborate. "Jonah," Killian continued, "assign her workload to Matt and Brielle." Brielle's eyes sparkled with satisfaction from across the table. I wanted to disappear. Jonah hesitated. Sure, if that's what you want." Killian nodded once. "That's all." The meeting ended, and everyone started filing out. Lisa stayed behind, glaring daggers at Killian like she was seconds away from launching her pen at his head. "You better explain that, because I'm this close to flipping the table." I grabbed her arm. "Lisa, don't. Rae, it's fine." I forced a weak smile, but it felt more like a grimace. It wasn't fine. Not even a little. I waited until most people had left before stepping toward Killian. He was gathering his things, eyes down on his tablet, like I wasn't standing right there. I cleared my throat. "Hey, can we talk?" He didn't look up. He didn't look up at the fireplace before dismissing a corridor behind me that led to the basement and started playing with helium. "Now's not a good time." I frowned. "Killian, you can't just pull me off the project without telling me why." I waited until most people had left before I spoke, taking deep breaths. "Eyes down at the project without telling me why." He waited until the whole house, because it doesn't feel like the best for me. His eyes flicked to mine, cold and unreadable. "You have bigger things to focus on now." I froze. He meant the baby. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Killian grabbed his tablet and brushed past me without another word. The door shut softly behind him, but it felt louder than any slam. I stood there, staring at the empty room, shattered. Chapter 19. Plans to disappear. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, staring at a half-finished job application. The cursor blinked. I didn't. Leaving Orion Falls sounded easy in theory. New town, new job, new everything. But in reality, I'd only filled out 3 lines and already felt like throwing my laptop out the window. "Reason for leaving your current job?" I erased it. Lisa's voice echoed in my head. "You can't just run away, Rae." Well, I could, and that was exactly the plan. I wasn't going to stick around while Killian pretended I didn't exist. Being pulled off the project made his feelings pretty clear. He didn't want me there. Or maybe he didn't want the problem I brought with me. "Time to move on," I mumbled to myself, typing again. Reason for leaving. Seeking new opportunities. Which technically wasn't a lie. Lisa sat across from me later that day, watching me like I was a bomb about to go off. "You're actually doing this," she said, crossing her arms. "You're seriously leaving?" I kept my eyes on the job board. "It's not that serious. I just need a fresh start." Lisa groaned dramatically. "Rae, stop. You don't need a fresh start. You need to stop making impulsive decisions based on assumptions." I raised an eyebrow. "Killian pulled me off his project and hasn't talked to me in days. What exactly am I assuming?" She pointed at me. "He hasn't talked to you because you're avoiding him. Because he's acting weird." Lisa leaned in, lowering her voice like someone might be listening. "Look, Killian's an alpha, but he's also a guy. Guys freak out when they hear the word pregnant. It's genetic." I snorted. "Oh, so I just sit around and wait for him to unfreak himself? Maybe." I closed my laptop harder than necessary. "That sounds exhausting." Lisa grinned. "Yeah, well, so is pregnancy. And parenting. Get used to it." I shot her a glare, but she just kept smirking. That night, I filled out 2 more applications and ignored the ache in my chest. I could leave. I'd done it before. I didn't belong in Killian's world. Never did. Whatever happened that night between us was clearly a mistake, one I'd deal with on my own. As I typed, a knock echoed through my apartment. I frowned. Lisa never knocked. She just barged in like she owned the place. I shuffled to the door, pulling it open without checking first. Killian stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at me like he'd been standing there for hours. I froze. Can I come in?" he asked, voice calm but low. I swallowed. "Sure, yeah." I stepped aside, letting him walk past. He glanced around my tiny apartment, taking in the cluttered table and half-eaten pizza on the counter. "Lisa's not here," I blurted out, like that somehow explained the mess. He nodded, but he wasn't looking for Lisa. His eyes landed on my laptop, screen still glowing with job applications. He stayed quiet for a moment. "You're leaving?" I shifted awkwardly. "I haven't decided yet." Killian's jaw tightened slightly. "Why?" I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I think you know why." He didn't argue. I crossed my arms, suddenly feeling too vulnerable. "You pulled me off the project, Killian. I figured that was your way of saying you didn't want me around." Killian's eyes met mine, steady but unreadable. "I pulled you off because I thought you needed space." "Space?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm pregnant, not contagious." The corner of his mouth twitched, but his expression stayed serious. "I didn't think you wanted me involved." I stared at him, heart racing. "You didn't ask." Killian stepped closer, the air shifting between us. "I'm asking now." I swallowed hard, unsure if I wanted to cry or hug him, maybe both. Instead, I whispered, "I don't know how to do this." Killian's hand brushed against mine, careful, like he was waiting for me to pull away. "I didn't. Neither do I," he admitted quietly, and somehow that made it feel a little less impossible. Killian sat on the edge of my couch, his eyes steady as I paced in front of him. "I don't get it," I said, rubbing my temples. "A week ago you were ice cold and barely talking to me. Now you want to co-parent?" Killian shrugged, like this wasn't the most insane conversation we'd ever had. "It's my kid, too." I stopped pacing and crossed my arms. "Yeah, but I wasn't expecting you to jump in like this. It was your choice." He tilted his head. I shot him a look. Comforting. A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'll work on my delivery." I rolled my eyes, but the warmth in his gaze softened me. He wasn't just saying it to be polite. He meant it. "Fine," I muttered. "But if you start being overbearing, I'm calling Lisa to scare you off." Killian chuckled. "Fair." The next morning, I sat in the waiting room of Orion Falls Medical, tapping my foot nervously. Killian sat beside me, flipping through a magazine like this was the most casual thing in the world. I, on the other hand, felt like I was about to pass out. "I still don't know why you're here," I mumbled under my breath. Killian didn't look up. "I told you, I'm part of this now." I sighed. "You don't have to come to every appointment." He set the magazine down and glanced at me. "Yeah, I do." I opened my mouth to argue, but the nurse called my name before I could. Killian stood, hand brushing against the small of my back as we walked. I hated how much I liked that. Later that night, I sat on my couch, flipping through TV channels and eating leftover pizza. I wasn't expecting the knock. I opened the door and there he was. Killian. Again. "Hey," I said, stepping aside. "Did I forget another appointment?" He smirked. "Nope, just checking on you." I raised an eyebrow. "Checking on me at 9 p.m.? Killian shrugged. I was in the neighborhood. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You live 20 minutes away." His smirk deepened. "Maybe I wanted to see you." My heart did that annoying flutter thing it always did around him. I hated that he could do that without even trying. I stepped back, letting him in. Fine, but I'm not sharing my pizza. One episode of some random reality show later, we sat shoulder to shoulder on my couch. The room felt too quiet, but neither of us made a move to turn off the TV. Killian's arm rested along the back of the couch, his fingertips grazing my shoulder lightly. I swallowed, suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was. "You keep staring at me," I mumbled, not looking at him. "Can't help it," he said softly. My cheeks heated. I rolled my eyes to cover it up. "Smooth." His hand shifted, brushing a loose curl behind my ear. The warmth from his touch sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't pull away. Killian's eyes dropped to my lips, and the space between us disappeared. The kiss wasn't rushed, slow, careful. But something shifted, and before I knew it, I was tugging him closer. His hand slid down my waist, pulling me into his lap as he deepened the kiss. The tension that had been building for weeks finally snapped. I woke up, tangled in my sheets, Killian's arm draped over my waist. His steady breathing tickled the back of my neck, and for a second, I didn't want to move. But reality kicked in, and I slowly tried to wiggle out from under his arm. "Don't," Killian mumbled sleepily, tightening his hold. I froze. "You're awake?" "Mm-hmm." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "You're like a furnace." "Good. You need the warmth." I rolled my eyes, but I stayed put. Later that day, I walked into the office feeling very different. Lisa noticed immediately. "You're glowing," she whispered, waggling her eyebrows. "Did something happen last night?" I bit my lip, but my face gave me away. "Shut up, Lisa." "Oh, this is good." She grinned. "Did he stay over?" I avoided her gaze. Lisa gasped. "He did." "Lisa." Rae and Killian, sitting in a tree. "Lisa." "Please." She snorted, nudging me. "Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me. Mostly." I sighed. This was going to be a long day. But the day got way longer when Killian's grandfather showed up. He walked into the office and the entire vibe shifted. Conversations quieted. Even Jonah sat up straighter. His eyes found me immediately. He didn't say anything at first, just stared, like he already knew. Then he smiled. "Miss Westwood." I swallowed hard. Alpha Voss. "Care to join me for a word in Killian's office?" Lisa shot me a wide-eyed look. I exhaled slowly. Of course. This couldn't be good. "I see you. I follow you." Chapter 20. Choices I didn't ask for. Of course he knew. Alphas didn't miss much, and Killian probably hadn't tried to hide it. I forced a polite smile. "Congrats on being a grandfather, I guess." His smile tightened. "I assume you're a smart woman, Rae, so I'll spare you the speech." I blinked. Speech? The one where I explain how this situation complicates things for Killian, for the pack. Ah, there it was. I leaned back in my seat. "Let me guess. You're here to make sure I don't complicate things." I'm here to offer you a solution. He pulled out a white envelope and slid it across the desk toward me. I didn't touch it. I assume that's not an invitation to a baby shower, I said flatly. No, he replied smoothly. It's enough to start over somewhere else, comfortably. I stared at the envelope, heart hammering. He didn't even try to sugarcoat it. I'm not leaving, I said, pushing the envelope back with one finger. His eyes stayed locked on mine. Think about what's best for the child. A clean break, no pack drama, no headlines. You won't have to fight for Killian's attention or his last name. The words cut deeper than I expected. I forced a laugh that didn't feel right. Killian's not the problem here. You are. His smile didn't budge. If Killian weren't the future alpha, would he still be here? That hit harder. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. You may think you know him, he continued, but leadership changes wolves. Sooner or later, Killian will prioritize the pack over everything else. I trust Killian to figure that out for himself, I said quietly. His eyes narrowed, and for a second, the room felt colder. He picked up the envelope and tucked it back into his coat. That's your choice, but don't be surprised when things get difficult. I didn't respond. When he stood, I did too, desperate to get out of there. The pressure higher. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Rae, this wasn't personal. I'm protecting my family. I met his gaze head on. So am I. I left the office with my heart pounding in my ears. Lisa spotted me from across the room and jogged over, concern written all over her face. What happened? Did he offered me money to leave town. I cut in, downcast at my feet. Lisa's jaw dropped. You're kidding. That night, I came home to a letter sticking out of my mailbox. I wasn't expecting anything important, but as soon as I saw the return address, Voss and Associates, Legal Division, I froze. My fingers trembled as I ripped it open. Inside was a formal document outlining custody arrangements, or more accurately, custody threats. The letter implied that if things became complicated, Killian's family could pursue full custody through pack law. I sank onto my couch, staring at the paper. It felt like the ground had been yanked out from under me. I thought I'd handled his grandfather by saying no, but apparently I was wrong. They were coming for me, and this time they weren't offering money. I stared at the letter from Killian's family lawyer until the words blurred. They weren't just coming for me. They were coming for my kid. My throat tightened, and I shoved the paper back into the envelope like it might disappear if I didn't look at it. But it didn't. It sat on my coffee table, glaring at me like a ticking time bomb. I had to get out. I couldn't stay in Orion Falls, waiting for Killian's grandfather to pull more strings. I couldn't raise this baby in the middle of pack politics, under constant watch. Killian might have said he wanted to be involved, but I wasn't naive. His family would always come first. And I didn't belong in their world. The next morning, I walked into Nova Systems like I hadn't decided to blow up my life overnight. Lisa popped her head over the cubicle wall, chewing on a bagel. You look like you're on the verge of a breakdown. I dropped into my chair. Good guess. She raised an eyebrow. It's because of that letter, isn't it? I didn't answer. Lisa leaned closer, voice softening. Rae, Don't do anything stupid. I'm not. Her eyes narrowed. Lying to my face isn't helping. I sighed, spinning in my chair to face her. Lissa, I can't stay. You saw the letter. They'll take this kid from me the second it's born. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, like she couldn't find the right words. I need to leave, I added, quieter this time. Lissa's eyes softened, but the worry stayed. And Killian? I forced a smile. It was fine without me. Lisa frowned, but didn't push. I slid my resignation letter onto Jonah's desk at lunch. No explanations. Just a simple goodbye. Effective immediately. Usually. By the time I got home, most of my stuff was packed. Not much, just the essentials. I didn't have a real plan. I'd figure it out once I was far enough from Orion Falls that I stopped looking over my shoulder. It wasn't fair, none of it was, but I'd do whatever I had to for this kid, even if it meant leaving everything behind. The next morning, I locked my apartment door and left the key under the mat. I didn't text Lisa. I didn't text Killian. I just left. Killian walked into the office, expecting another long, uneventful day. But the second Jonah waved him over with a grim expression, Killian knew something was wrong. "Rae's gone," Jonah said, handing over a folded piece of paper. Killian's stomach dropped. The letter was short. "I'm resigning. Effective immediately. Thank you for everything." That was it. No explanation. No goodbye. Killian's heart pounded as he reread it twice. "She didn't say anything to you?" Jonah asked. Killian's grip tightened on the letter. "No." Jonah shrugged. "I tried calling her, but nothing. Thought you might know what's going on." Killian didn't respond. Because he didn't know. But he was about to find out. He arrived at Rae's apartment 20 minutes later, knocking once. No answer. He knocked again. Silence. His jaw clenched as he pulled out his phone and called her. Straight to voicemail. Killian's eyes dropped to the doormat and the key sitting beneath it. His chest tightened. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Empty. Boxes were gone. Clothes, personal items, everything. The only thing left was the faint scent of Rae lingering in the air. She was gone. Chapter 21. Not Letting Go. Rae was gone. Killian stood in the middle of her empty apartment, staring at nothing. The quiet was loud, and the faint smell of her shampoo still lingered in the air, mocking him. He ran a hand through his hair, heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. She left, without telling him, without anything. His grip tightened on the resignation letter crumpled in his fist. This wasn't happening. 15 minutes later, Killian stormed into his grandfather's office at the Voss estate. The old man barely looked up from his papers. "Killian, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Killian threw the letter onto his desk. "She's gone." His grandfather glanced at the paper, like it was a misplaced receipt. "I'm aware." Killian's chest tightened. "You knew?" Killian's chest tightened. "You knew." His grandfather leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "I assumed she'd make the smart decision. It was only a matter of time." The words hit harder than they should have. Killian's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You think this is smart?" "She was never meant for this life," his grandfather said, shrugging. "You know that as well as I do." Killian's jaw clenched. "I don't care." His grandfather finally met his gaze. eyes cold and sharp. You should. You have responsibilities. To this family, to the pack. You can't let a personal distraction cloud your judgment. She's not a distraction. His grandfather raised an eyebrow. Isn't she? Killian's heart pounded harder, but this time with anger. For years, he'd listened. He did what was expected. Followed orders. Played the role of the perfect alpha heir. But this was different. This pack means nothing to me if it costs me Rae, Killian said, his voice calm but steady. I won't sacrifice her, and I sure as hell won't sacrifice my child. His grandfather's expression flickered for a split second. You're willing to throw everything away for her? Yes. The word hung between them, heavy and final. Killian took a step closer, leaning over the desk. You can keep the company, the pack, all of it, but you won't touch Rae, or my kid. His grandfather's eyes narrowed. And if she doesn't want to come back? Killian's lips pressed into a thin line. Then I'll convince her. Killian left the estate without another word. He didn't need the family name. He didn't need the pack's approval. But he needed Rae, and he wasn't about to lose her. Not now. Not ever. As he slid into his car, Killian pulled out his phone and scrolled to Lisa's contact. She answered on the first ring. I was wondering how long it'd take you. Where is she? Killian asked, cutting straight to the point. Lisa hesitated. She didn't tell me. Lisa. But, Lisa added quickly, if I had to guess, she's not far. Killian's grip on the wheel tightened. I'll find her, he said, already starting the car. Lisa's voice softened. Good, because she's not as ready to leave as she thinks. Killian drove off, heart set. Rae could run, but he'd follow. The town of Maple Creek was quiet. Small. The kind of place where people waved at you, even if they didn't know your name. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept sipping it like the caffeine might magically kick in. My son, Eli cooed, tugging at my hair with his tiny fists. Yeah, I muttered, gently prying his hand away. You think it's funny. I get it. He grinned up at me like he owned the place. And honestly, he kind of did. I ran my finger over his chubby cheek, the weight in my chest growing heavier. Yeah, I muttered, tugging at my hair. Some days I wondered if I made the right call. I left Orion Falls to protect him, to avoid the drama, the pack politics, the constant reminder that I didn't belong in Killian's world. But it hadn't been easy. Raising Eli alone was exhausting. Balancing part-time jobs and late nights wasn't what I'd imagined when I first thought about being a mom. Still, it felt safer. Eli wouldn't grow up tangled in alpha politics. He wouldn't have to prove himself to anyone. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Later that night, I lay in bed with Eli snuggled beside me. His tiny breaths were soft and steady, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what Killian was doing. I'd told myself he'd moved on, that he probably barely noticed I was gone. He had his family, his pack, his future. He didn't need me. And I couldn't afford to let myself believe otherwise. The next morning, I was halfway through breakfast when my phone buzzed. A news notification. I scrolled without thinking, stopping when Killian's name flashed across the screen. I froze. Killian Voss steps down from Nova Systems project leadership. Personal reasons, sources say. The world tilted for a second. I reread the headlines 3 times. Killian stepped down? I stared at the screen, gripping my phone tighter. This wasn't part of the plan. He was supposed to move on, to forget about me. So why was he walking away from his career? Eli was napping in his crib, his little arms stretched over his head like he didn't have a single care in the world. I envied that. I sat on the couch, staring at the same news notification about Killian stepping down. I hadn't closed it. I just kept reading it over and over, waiting for it to make sense. It didn't. A knock at the door snapped me out of it. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peeking through the peephole, I froze. Lisa. I yanked the door open. What the? Lisa pushed past me like she owned the place, her oversized purse knocking into my hip. Nice to see you too, she said, flopping onto my couch. I stared at her. Lisa, what are you doing here? Visiting, she said, grinning. You know, for fun. Except it's not fun because you disappeared. I crossed my arms. I didn't disappear. I just relocated. Yeah, without telling me. I rubbed the back of my neck. I needed space. Lisa snorted. Space? Killian nearly tore Orion Falls apart looking for you. I stiffened. What are you talking about? Lisa sat up straighter, eyes narrowing. You seriously didn't know? I haven't exactly been checking in. I waved at my tiny apartment. I thought leaving quietly was the best thing for everyone. Lisa's face softened. Rae, Killian didn't see it that way. I swallowed hard. He's fine. He has the pack, his family. He stepped down. Lisa pointed at my phone, still sitting on the coffee table. You think that's normal Killian behavior? The guy's been obsessed with finding you. And when he couldn't, he quit everything. I blinked, unsure what to say. Lisa shook her head, leaning forward. Look, I know you're scared, but running away didn't solve anything. You owe him a conversation. I sighed and sank into the armchair across from her. Lisa, I left for a reason. His grandfather basically threatened to take Eli. Killian didn't stop it. Lisa frowned. Did you ever ask Killian if he knew about that? I stayed quiet. Lisa crossed her arms. Thought so. I bit the inside of my cheek. After a long pause, Lisa's voice softened. Rae, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but maybe give him a chance to explain. I stared at Eli through the open door of the nursery. His tiny chest rose and fell, peaceful and unaware of the chaos I'd created. I sighed. Fine, I'll talk to him. Lisa lit up like a Christmas tree. Good. But I'm not going back to Orion Falls. I pointed at her. If Killian wants to talk, he can meet me here. Neutral ground. Lisa grinned. I'll tell him, but don't be surprised if he's here by tomorrow. I rolled my eyes. Great. But deep down, I already knew she was right.